Thank you so much, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. Looks like a really nice group today. So thank you all for joining live. I know it's easy to watch the recording, so I appreciate you being here. And we're going to be talking about a topic that's dear to my heart. You can see my own little behavior bingo dog with his little sad face on the screen. We're going to talk about dogs who have multiple behavior challenges today. I'm going to start off just introducing myself and like telling you a little bit about my story and why this topic is important to me. And then we have sort of three main sections to this presentation. We're going to talk about unpicking the puzzle that is a complex dog, because sometimes it's hard to see the forest through the trees. We're going to look at setting goals and how we can go about goal setting and making plans for these very complex dogs. And we're going to finish up talking about expertise and support. So what you need to be looking for in terms of your care team, your support team, to see really amazing success with these dogs. And so I'm going to get started and introduce myself. My name is Karishma Warr. My pronouns are they, them. I find it useful sometimes to tell you just some things about me because this is a very unique topic, and I'm sure the people here are also quite unique people who are very interested in this. I have mixed descent. I have a very neurospicy brain and a chronically ill, very sensitive body. And I also have a poodle, a very sweet, sensitive poodle called Hira. And so I have a background in experiencing life as a sensitive creature and then also caring for a sensitive creature myself when I had no experience at the beginning. And I'll talk more about that. And as you'll see as we go through, I have a background in academics, in ethics and philosophy and animal liberation, and I kind of bring it all together. So we're really working with very, very sensitive animals, often whom the standard procedures and institutions have not really been able to help them. So that's kind of our niche, and it's a exciting niche to be in. But it didn't start there. I want to just give you a little bit of background. I started my career as a dog trainer. Ooh, that's definitely a typo. There you go. You can see my spicy brain coming out here in the presentation. I started my work as a dog trainer 8 years ago, and I was working in New York City and living and working full time there in like an in-person facility. And I started specializing working with anxious and reactive dogs, and I saw pretty good success with those dogs. These are New York City dogs as well, so I was used to like quite a big challenge. And I considered myself after a year or two sort of working in the business, I considered myself to be getting pretty skilled. And then I stumbled across this little monster who was intended to be my mum's dog, but who never ended up being able to be the dog of an retired, Indian woman who's never had a dog before. And he ended up staying with me. In the first few months of us having him, we got him at around 4.5 months old. He developed a host of problems, issues related to sounds, different environments. He'd be terrified just walking out of the front door. People were scary, dogs, handling. He had struggled with settling and hyperactivity, cars, machinery, moving objects, just so much fear that spread into reactivity over the first few years of his life. It got worse and worse and more complex. And the things I was doing before were not working with him. The things that I was doing before with my clients that were working with previous dogs that I'd cared for, none of that was working with him. And he really forced me to really change everything that I was doing, because here is one of those dogs. He's very complex. He's the sort of dog who, I worked as a dog trainer seeing success in so many cases, yet I couldn't see success with him. He's not alone. There are lots of dogs out there like him, I think more than there used to be, especially in the hands of the public. And over the last 5 years, 4 years, 5 years, I've really transformed the way that I work with dogs. I no longer just kind of train dogs. We now work as a group. We're called Calm Canine Academy, and we provide dog-centered care for dogs who have really challenging behavior concerns. We have a community that is just incredible, and I'm so happy for you guys here. I recognize some people just from like around the internet, so thank you for being here. And our goal is actually to kind of use the dog-human connection to help us heal together. And when we have these super sensitive dogs, they force us to become really nuanced in the way that we approach this. And that is the benefit, is that at the end of working with these cases, you become fantastic at your job or the most incredible guardian. And so I'm going to talk today about some of the most important things that took me and Hera from growling, biting, hiding, shaking to a well-rounded, happy little guy, and truly the transformation that we can see with him, and then also with, of course, hundreds and hundreds of other dogs around the world, has been incredible. So we work now purely virtually. We specialize in working with these exact cases because the goal is to teach the guardians the nuance that they need. So if you're a dog guardian who has one of these dogs, actually, I'd be curious, tell me in the chat, who is a guardian and who's a professional, because that's useful for me to know and just interesting. Because even if whether you're a professional or a guardian, you're going to need to really niche down and get a good amount of understanding of what's going on with your dog, more so than the average person. And that's why professional and guardian, rescue professional, guardian, hopefully, yeah, there's often like people on the edge. Nice, amazing. Thank you guys, both. So many boths. How interesting is that? Okay, so these cases are a little bit different. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through, first of all, one of the ways that we help unpick the behavior puzzle. So I'm going to start off there because if you're anything like I was at the beginning with Hera, or my clients are when they come to join my coaching services or any of my things that however I work with them, we're often so overwhelmed because there are so many things going on. By behavior bingo, we mean dogs that have multiple behavior challenges, right? We're talking about dogs who might have behavior challenges like, let's have a little look at different triggers that we might be seeing our dogs struggling with. And I want you to get in the chat. I quite enjoy the back and forth. So if anyone's in the chat and likes chatting with me, let's chat, because I want to hear what are the triggers that you are seeing repeatedly in your dogs, your professional career, whatever you're seeing. At the CCA, this is the kind of spectrum of behavior challenges that we see at the forefront. And we see dogs probably sometimes exhibiting all of these different challenges. So dogs might be experiencing challenges with sounds. They might be panicking when they go outside, even when there's no one there. And then if they see people or dogs, they're completely overwhelmed. They can't be left alone. And if they see a squirrel, they'll have a meltdown. And they'll also be sick and shake in the car. If you touch their food, they'll growl. If you try to touch them, they might also growl. And there might be other things on the list. And this is the standard case that we work with at CCA. This is not unusual to us. People are saying, yeah, cats, people, cars, exactly. Multiple different triggers. This is kind of the cases that we're looking at. When I first started working as a dog trainer, people would be like, my dog barks at other dogs. Those are the cases that I would get. Or my puppy doesn't come when called. This is a very different situation that we're in. Yes, wind, someone says, absolutely. These behavior bingo cases tend to be very upset, agitated by innocuous stimulus because they're so sensitive to everything. And their behavior sometimes doesn't make sense. It can be really confusing. One day they react to something, the next day they don't. They're changeable over the year or over the years. And so the first thing that we do when we have clients come to us with these sorts of challenges is we unpick the puzzle. So if you want to, grab a piece of paper and a pen. We're going to zoom out. We're going to have a little audit and have a little think about how behavior works and how it all interacts. Before we can even think about what do we do when they react, how do we desensitize and counter condition, we need to just zoom out and have a really good understanding of this dog. And you, the guardian or the guardian, the primary caregiver, needs to understand how this works. And so we often use an analogy, which is an analogy called the stress sink, by an amazing British vet. And it's an analogy that helps us understand behavior. Has anyone heard of the stress bucket, a stress bucket? Ever? That's quite often used in dog training, a stress bucket. Anyway, this is the better version of the bucket if you have. Basically, it's an analogy that helps us understand why our dogs do things and the patterns of their very complex patterns of their behavior. So your dog has a sink. That sink fills with water and has the capacity to flood. When the sink floods and overflows with water, that's when they're having any sort of extreme reaction. So maybe they are barking, lunging, maybe they're shaking, maybe they're frantic, unable to respond, unable to eat. Those big behaviors where we kind of lose them, that's a sink overflowing. It can look very different to different dogs. So I want you guys to think, first of all, like, what does it look like when my dog is what we might traditionally call over threshold, which I find sometimes helpful, sometimes not as a term. Really, we're talking about those times where your dog is unreachable. Your dog is unable to be reasoned with, negotiated with, reached. So we have these sinks, and go with me on this journey. I know it's a bit weird. You're like, wait a second, I'm here to do dog training. Just go with me. Just sit with me for a minute. They have the sinks, they overflow. When they're overflowing, they're panicking. Maybe that's when they're left alone and they're howling, or they see another dog and they're barking, or they hear a noise and they're shaking, right? We're going to look at the pieces of the sink, right? The basin, your dog's basin can be of varying sizes. The size of their basin determines how much stress they can endure. Stress is a word we need to define. Just give me a moment. The size of their basin is determined in the first year of their life by genetics, socialization, and early life experiences. It's one of the things that can't be altered about the sink. A plumber can't really change the basin. The basin is fixed after a year. And so we often see dogs coming to us with poor genetics. Let's give Hero as an example. I'm going to use him as an example throughout this. He was from a high output breeder in North America. I didn't know better at the time. He was at the breeder until 4.5 months, and that means he didn't get very much care or socialization for those first 4.5 months. He came to me with a broken tail. He had never been groomed and had lots of heavy matting. How big do we think Hero's basin is? Probably not super big, right? It's a pretty small basin. I work with a lot of dogs who come from they were former street dogs and they were sort of brought to this country, or dogs who were born in a shelter, or to very sick parents. These are the sorts of things that impact the basin size. And most dogs here likely have a slightly reduced size or a small basin. Right, this is often part of the explanation, and it's important to remember this, because if we understand what we can and can't change, we can then make really great informed decisions about what we're doing. So we have the basin. It's determined by a few different things. If your dog's over a year old, we've missed the boat on that. That's okay. There's lots that we can control. Let's talk more. There's a drain that allows the water to flow out of the sink, but that can get blocked up if the dog is sick, if the dog is sore. I'm sure folks have heard, but there are studies that are very widely popularized now. Then one of them showed in the sample size that 80% of the dogs with behavior challenges had some sort of painful condition. And painful condition is a big word. It can mean lots of different things. But if we have a dog that has a small basin and now they have arthritis or GI distress, we have not much space in that sink. We have a drain that is clogging up. Oftentimes this drain is clogged, we can't see it. We don't even know that it's clogged, right? It's somewhere we can't see it happening, and that you can see the puzzle. You can see what's being created here, right? Now let's talk about how the water goes in the sink. So how does the stress enter into the dog's body, into the dog's life? Now stress can mean many things. It doesn't necessarily always have to be bad, but a lot of the time it is bad. And in this analogy, that bad stress is cold water going into the cold water tap, so the blue tap, right? So negative valence emotional stress is just a fancy way of saying things that feel bad. So like or states that feel bad: frustration, fear, anxiety, anger. So dogs tend to have cold tap triggers. So here is cold tap triggers. People, so scary. Men, so scary. That cold tap is blasting. If there's a man approaching him, the cold tap is on full and that water is just pouring in the sink. Noises, the cold tap, every time he hears a noise outside the house, scary. Being groomed, cold tap, terrifying, really scary. Sometimes he always also experienced anger with other dogs. When other dogs bullied him or pushed him around, he would be angry and frustrated as well. And those were also cold tap triggers. And Hira struggled with lots of different cold tap things. So you can imagine how much water is going in that sink. Oh, I forgot to tell you about Hira's drain issues. Hira has arthritis, has hip dysplasia as well, and also had chronic ear infections as a young puppy. So that's why his drain was a little bit clogged up, just so you get the full picture here. There. And then he had a whole bunch of cold tap triggers on top of that. So I want you to think about your dog. Let's just reflect so far. We've got the basin size, we've got the drain, we've got the cold tap. We've also got the hot tap, things that cause stress, but it's positive valence emotional stress. So things like excitement, really, really happy, and things like for Hira, like predatory behaviors, seeing birds and squirrels, he would be so excited, so like happy, like it was positive valence. Playing like with toys, positive valence. The people he liked, positive valence, but also kind of too excited, if that makes sense. So there was a lot of hot water going in the sink as well. And so maybe your dogs get super excited when you come home from work, or when they see another dog, they're not stressed, they're not scared, but they're so excited. And there's still that's hot water going in that sink. And it's important to think about that, because it's not just it's not just the cold water that fills up the sink, right? The hot water fills up the sink too. And that's why if your dog's really excited, they're more likely to have maybe like a negative valence of a cold tap emotion, a big response. Now, the kind of last little pieces here, which is where we get into the nuance that I think really benefits folks, is that we can have both taps on at the same time. Both taps are on in situations when there is conflict. I want this thing and I'm really excited and want it, but I'm also nervous about it. So when I first was working with Hira with people, before I knew better, I would have people tell him to sit and then give him cookies, and have men tell him to do a hand touch. And what I was doing was asking him to go closer to the people. He wanted the cookie. He did not want to be close to the people. And I thought I was building good associations, but actually both taps were on blast. And he was probably often have like an overwhelmed growl response or a lunge bark response sometimes in those moments. And I would be very confused as to why. Another one that I see is playing fetch when the dog is sore. I see lots of dogs who will play fetch and then suddenly bite someone. And everyone's like, why did that happen? And I'm like, well, we should probably x-ray them, because there's likely something wrong with something in there. But this is why sometimes our dogs can seem like they're flickering between different kind of motivations, different emotional states, different valences. And someone's saying a scared hunter. So they want to hunt, but they're also fearful. Yes, I also see painful hunters a lot. So dogs who are obsessed with hunting, but it's also they have maybe some sort of hip issue or knee issue or body issue, and so they're getting painful, and that makes them hunt more. And it makes very little sense when you think about it. But also, I've worked for 12 hours because I felt depressed. You know, it's dopamine seeking. It's an addiction, essentially the same pathways that are present in addiction. It actually does make sense. It just looks weird from the outside. And that's why breaking this down is really helpful, because if we don't understand this, we're not going to be able to resolve the problems that we're experiencing. So we have the hot tap, the cold tap, we have the both taps. And lastly, we have things that can help drain the basin. So sniffing, sleeping, chewing, licking, cuddling. What drains your dog's basin, right? What helps them come down when they're stressed? Every dog's different. For some dogs, it'll be eating and food. For some dogs, it'll be, you know, social support. For some dogs, it might be movement, like moving and sniffing and freedom of movement. Some dogs need to go in a crate. Need you to play Taylor Swift and turn the lights off, you know? It depends. So you need to understand the different things that affect your dog's behavior and how they interact with behavior bingo dogs. Because we're not just dealing with one thing, we're dealing with an ecosystem, and we have to understand the whole ecosystem if we're going to be seeing any progress, and we'll talk about that next. Teresa's asking, does it make a difference if I help draining the basin if my dog finds a way to do it on her own? Great, oh, sorry for swearing. Great question. I just got excited by that question because it's a good one. Often at the beginning, they need our help because they've lost the ability to do it themselves, right? So we see dogs who are panicking. They're not breathing through their nose. They can't access the sniffing that might calm them down. They're running, they're not walking. And we've all been there, right? Where we're getting ourselves worked up and we need someone to be like, sit down, take a breath. I'm right, like, calm down. So often at the beginning, we need to help them. And sometimes part of our training plan is creating routines and rituals between us and the dogs that help them regulate in whatever way they need to. But the goal is always that the dog can do it themselves. The goal is not that we have to sit there like a puppet master forever being like sniff, sit down. The goal is that we give them prompts like a child. You teach a toddler to take a deep breath and eventually they start feeling stressed and then going, I'm going to take a deep breath. So if we go through that procedure and that process enough with them, they should be able to eventually pick it up themselves if it's done right. Great question. Really good. All right, so this was my little deep dive into unpicking this puzzle. We have a few different questions to think about. You can take a little screenshot if you want to remind yourselves. And I want you guys to think about this analogy just as you go through the day with your dogs or with your clients' dogs. Because sometimes the first step is not actually to jump in and start changing behavior. It's to start watching and gathering data and tracking things and seeing what are the patterns here, especially if don't have a huge amount of experience in this area, because you won't be able to see those patterns super quickly. So you're going to have to start looking really carefully and really mindfully at what's going on. All right, so we've maybe hopefully got some sort of an idea of what's going on. And with Hera, for example, I was looking down this list of questions and going, oh God, this is not looking super great. Okay. He's got a really tiny little basin, can't do anything about that. I've now discovered that he's got hip dysplasia and arthritis going on and likely has pain and like chronic pain and also has these ear infections. The overflow looked like many different things, sometimes shutting down and fearful and unable to do anything, sometimes biting and snarling and fighting. It was very varied depending on the context. And I have so many triggers that fill up his basin, so many things that he's stressed about. And sometimes on top of this, we have really challenging environments. That's the last thing here that I don't really have factored in because I worked in New York City for the first 5 years of my career. I live in London now. It's better than New York, but it's not easy. And if we're doing an audit, it's important to bring the context into the mix. And so I work privately with clients. I coach privately and have a small team who also provides like coaching services for these kind of challenges. And at the beginning, I need to understand everything about what's going on. And I also need to get on the same page about what's going on with the client. And so sometimes we're spending like a week going back and forth, you sending videos, we taking notes, us asking questions to figure this out. So I don't want to act like it's super simple because it's actually not. You're dealing with really complicated dogs here, and that's okay. We can see amazing transformation with these cases. We really can, but it isn't simple. I'm not going to lie to anyone and tell you that it is, all right? So you've got this like situation where at the beginning we're gathering data, we're learning, and often we're really discovering a lot about this animal. The next thing we want to think about is setting goals for this sort of case. How many folks just feel like so overwhelmed when they have all of these different behavior challenges? You're like, where do we even start? The biggest mistake that people make is they try to do everything at once. They are reactive, meaning that they just see a problem, have an emotional response, and then react to that problem rather than taking like a proper high level look at the situation. So I ask these questions. What challenges are affecting you, the human, most? Or the guardians the most? And then I ask what challenges are affecting the dog the most. So for example, if we have like separation anxiety, that's often one that's really affecting the guardian, right? Because they're struggling to leave the dog alone without the dog completely panicking. I have lots of clients who'll come to me and be like, I want to work on my dog's stranger danger so that I can have guests in the house. And then I look into it and I realize that the dog is unable to sleep because they're so sound sensitive. And I say to them, well, actually, you're being most affected by the human related aggression, but the sound sensitivity is what's affecting the dog the most. And so figuring out if there is any, what connects and what doesn't connect, it's useful to think about. So writing down your list of the different kind of challenges, maybe sounds, people, dogs, car rides, etc., separation, and then looking and thinking, okay, where does that, who's affected by this? Because when we're setting goals, we have to make sure that we're setting the right goals. And then I also asked the last question, which is what can be managed and what can't be managed, right? When we have dogs that struggle with so many different things, there are some things that we can just put a pin in, and there are other things that we really can't. So Hera, for example, he struggled with grooming, sounds, people, dogs, car rides, new environments, most things he was fine with being alone. But the things I could put a pin in, I could manage his dog and people behaviors at the beginning with a lot of avoidance, but I couldn't really manage his sound sensitivity because I live in a city, it's noisy. So I needed to address the sound sensitivity kind of really quickly because I couldn't manage that. Or maybe we have a case where we have separation anxiety and massive fear and reactivity, but the guardians work from home. Great, we can manage the separation anxiety for a minute, we can get a handle on the other stuff. So this makes a difference when we're thinking about setting goals, is what are we working with here? What challenges are affecting the humans, what challenges are affecting the dogs? And when we set goals, we do have to bear both in mind. We can't just make plans for the dogs and we can't just make plans for the humans. We have to think of them as a unit. So if a guardian says to me, I'm exhausted with the separation anxiety stuff, I can't keep like 24-hour care of this dog because I'm a single guardian, that might elevate the separation anxiety up the list of importance for me, because the human guardian and their stamina, their burnout, their needs are just as important as the dog's needs. And so we have to really take that approach where we're meeting everybody where they're at. Sometimes my job is to mediate between needs, right? Because I want to be accommodating. I want to make my procedures and protocols accessible. I work with a lot of like neurodivergent folk, a lot of disabled folk. I myself have experienced all of those things as well. And so I understand the importance of making things accessible, but then I also have to bear in mind that sometimes there are limits, to what we can do. So I've had clients before who say, I'm really exhausted, I can't do this anymore, or I really don't want to do this anymore. And my job has been to say, okay, well, we cannot achieve this goal without these adjustments and these accommodations. And then our job is not to blame anyone, it's to just find harm reduction strategies, find a medium, find a midpoint that works, that's still going to be effective. And notice how I haven't even talked about behavior yet. I haven't talked about click treating once. I haven't talked about teaching anything. 90% of these cases is in the way we're approaching them, the systems that we have in place, and the strategies that we're using. And when we are setting goals, we need to take a really integrative, holistic approach. And what that means is we are not going to come in with a cookie cutter procedure that we do. And I see this all the time. I see people who say, okay, this is a problem X, so we're going to teach the dog a sit stay, and then we're going to counter condition to the stimulus, and then we're going to be done. That's not how it works with these behavior case dogs. There are often problems at the root. There are often problems in the basic wellness of the dog that are causing and coming out as all of these different triggers. So if you go to a dog trainer and you say, we have problems with dogs, on leash, they might start taking you outside and start practicing, look at that dog, walk with me. It's often that is inappropriate for these cases because they are not even close to ready for that kind of learning procedure. We need to focus on the wellness factors. And by wellness factors, what I mean is that it's not just the cookies and the click treats that affect behavior. Behavior is affected by lots of different things. It's actually quite complicated to the point that we have built our own kind of framework to help these sensitive dog guardians through these complex cases, and we call it the HEAL framework. It's not the only framework. There are many training and wellness frameworks out there. Pet Harmony's enrichment framework, Sarah Stremming's behavioral wellness framework are two that spring to mind. There are lots of others. What we do in our HEAL framework is we split up the different factors that impact behavior into 4 sections: health, exposure, activity, and learning. I'm going to give you like a 5-minute, maybe 10-minute tour of this framework to give you just an idea of what we're looking at here when it comes to training plans. But I want to let you know that we have a 1.5-hour webinar that overviews the HEAL framework in full, and that's available in our membership, which I'll talk about later. But I say that to give you an idea of how brief I'm going here. I'm giving you a real flyby tour of what's going on. But 4 areas that impact behavior. We are basically going to use the HEAL framework to fix up that sink. That's what we're going to do. We're going to use the HEAL framework to systematically create the best sink that we can with what we've got. And so we start off looking in the health category. Now, health of the animal is so important. We know in the sink analogy that drain being clogged can slow down how much they can regulate themselves. Well, with these sorts of sensitive dogs, honestly, sometimes me and my staff sit around in our trainer meetings and we're like, are we just medical liaisons? Like, is that our job? And honestly, yes. Like, because so many of these dogs are struggling with medical challenges, our job actually becomes helping you get the care that you need, because it's very hard to get these things diagnosed for a variety of reasons. I'm not going to go into it too much. What we are usually helping guardians uncover and diagnose are issues with diet and GI. So that can look like a dog who just intermittently has loose stool for no reason, very sensitive tummy. Maybe they're vomiting sometimes in the morning. Maybe they're like lip smacking, picky eating. You know, if you see any of these behavior things popping up along in a behavior bingo dog, if you were in one of our programs, we'd be going straight to the diet and GI section of our framework, which is robust, and looking and investigating and guiding you through that. We see dogs with grooming challenges, matting, itchiness, long nails. Sounds a bit silly, isn't it? If someone comes to me for separation anxiety and I'm like, is your dog matted? Or does your dog have long nails? People often go, what does that have to do with separation anxiety? Oh, it has everything to do with separation anxiety. Because if you're a little bit uncomfortable in 100 ways, guess what happens? It trickles down into your behavior. And so we need to be plugging all these gaps, and we need to be robust, right? So we look into allergies. Hira had allergies and he had a yeast overgrowth in his ears and on his skin that took a little bit of time to figure out. Pain and illness, vast category. But for Hira, that was diagnosing hip dysplasia, which then had kind of knockoff effects of osteoarthritis and a knee injury. And lastly, in the health category, we have stress and trauma, which is anxiety conditions, which is that tiny little basin, right? Behavior bingo dogs need robust support in the health category. Almost all of them need daily anxiety medications if they want to actually see transformational healing. You might be able to have them just cope without, but that's not good enough for me. I have high standards when I'm working with clients. I want them to be amazing. I want them to thrive. And so I'm not going to be gentle about this. Like, we're talking about very serious cases. We're talking about dogs that have really a lot of challenges, lots of dogs who have seen multiple dog trainers. And so we're looking at all of these things. It can be really hard to get pain diagnosed. We have a free webinar in our webinar library called Hidden Hurt, which is all about how much the medical industrial complex doesn't understand how to diagnose pain, which then leads to guardians going to the vet looking for medical problems and being told nothing's wrong when actually there are things that are wrong. Our job as coaches is to help you figure that out and get what you need, and we have an expertise in that area. But the webinar is a really nice free place for folks who want to learn more about that. You can find it on my website. All right, that's the health category. Exposure, second. How much your dog experiences stress on a day-to-day basis impacts their overall behavior. Someone came to me talking today about a dog that was dog reactive, and I started asking her to cover the windows at the home, in the home. And she was like, why are you worrying about the windows in the home? My dog is reactive outside on walks. And I'm like, yeah, that water is going in that sink. And this dog has a lot of medical issues, so that sink is not draining. And I need to make sure that I can remove any unnecessary water that's going in that sink because it all interacts. So in the exposure category, we're looking at like safety, we're looking at how the dog feels on a day-to-day basis, on how we stop them from rehearsing patterns that we don't want them to rehearse. And that's, again, a big topic in and of itself. Health, exposure. Third, we have activity. So how your dog spends their day, whether they're fulfilled, is so important, right? And we've learned about enrichment. I think a lot of us learn about, like, you know, how we should be giving our dogs things to do. Well, I like to take this even a step further, you know, creating an activity schedule for a sensitive dog is an art form. It is a therapeutic process. I can heal help animals heal through the way we create their weekly schedule. And within the HEAL framework, we have different areas that we find really important to investigate, such as their access to nature and decompression, foraging, play, predation, movement, rest. And we take like a somatic approach to the therapies where we say, I'm not going to start, you know, trying to teach you to heal next to dogs if you're not getting exercise. We need to build from the ground up with these dogs. And often these dogs have restricted lives. They're really stressed, they're scared, they're overwhelmed. And so the first few weeks or months that we work with clients, we're often establishing this foundation, this holistic foundation of health, exposure, and activity, making sure their physical body is healthy, making sure they're not overwhelmed by stress on a day-to-day basis, and crafting an activity schedule that will support healing. We also do have learning, the last kind of pillar in the HEAL framework, which is the area which is about communication, learning experiences. This is training, you know, when we teach them skills. And it's more than that to me. It's how we communicate with them, and the nature of our relationship is kind of based off of that communication, right? So if we have clear, kind communication, we can build secure attachment, and we can build skills that can help us, and we can learn how to teach the dogs in a way that makes them feel really good, so that our training stands up against their big feelings that they have for all of these things. This is nothing that we can go over in an hour, 45 minutes. This is a huge endeavor. We have programs that span 3 months and 6 months where we help guardians go through this process, and like I said, fully virtually. But I guess if you're just starting out, 3 tips I will give you, just like to hold in your head. Make changes upstream that will have a trickle-down effect. We have a dog that's lunging and barking at dogs on the street, and they're also really vigilant at the window in the house all day. I might cover that window so that they sleep more in the house. And then guess what happens? They're going to be much more regulated on walks because they're sleeping more. And I made an upstream change. Does that make sense? So something like anxiety medication is an upstream change because it trickles downstream and affects everything down the stream that it touches. And so rather than making changes that yeah, so for example, with the dog stuff, if your dog's reacting to dogs on walks, you could take the dog outside and start trying to train them around the dogs. That would be a downstream change. Or you could introduce more sleep into their environment, which will then positively influence the barking behavior and everything else. Hopefully that makes sense, because we're dealing with multiple behavior challenges and you can't tackle each one individually. You have to make wellness changes that affect all of them. And it really does work if you get it right. On that note, you cannot tackle everything at once. You cannot train separation anxiety problems, stranger danger, dog reactivity, sound issues, and handling all at the same time. You can't even really do 3 of them at the same time. Focus on one goal. And then what's your weekly goal? What's your daily goal? One. It's really hard to do that. It's an art form, it's a skill. And that brings me to my last little piece here, which is that what you're probably realizing is that this is a big topic because we're dealing with every single trigger that could exist and all of them in harmony or disharmony often, right? So I would be remiss if I didn't stress the importance of working with a behavior consultant with these cases. When we have dogs who are like a little bit barky or a little bit nervous about one thing, you don't have to seek out professional advice straight away. You can always try your best and see what you can get done. With these cases, trying to DIY a training plan completely on your own, especially through like social media or even like a book, for example, I think it can be very dangerous personally. I've seen it go wrong many, many times. I don't mean to scaremonger people. I just want to also be realistic about like what a layman can do and what a layman can't do. And I made these mistakes myself. I was a professional trainer working with my dog and I didn't have the expertise I needed. I also understand that this is a really expensive thing to have access to. It's sometimes hard to find people. And the online information through people like EveryDog and like my own company is a great place to start. So EveryDog has a phenomenal webinar library. Please go and check it out. It's really, really good. And it has a lot of different people's voices, which is really useful because you can learn a lot of different things. I have my own on my website, which is calmcanineacademy.com/webinar library. And of course, it's got a slightly more specific angle because this is all I do. So you'll see different resources that are free, completely free. Our Instagram also has tons and tons and tons of free content, especially the live streams on different topics where I'll sit down for like half an hour to talk about handling or reactivity or separation anxiety. So please go and check those out because there are really amazing resources where you can learn a lot, especially about like initial steps that you can take to like reduce harm and make everyone's life easier. Working with a professional is always my number one, but if you want some help and you don't really have enough resources for full support, I offer a membership. You can find it on my website, calmcanineacademy.com/membership, where we have a growing library of courses that dive into the framework that we use and explain it all for the guardians and professionals. We also have like a behavior discussion group where people ask questions and send videos, and we have a support channel where people can like support each other on the way. And it's an amazing community. We've got 106 members. I'm maxing it out at 200 for a while because I'm a bit overwhelmed. It's growing really quickly. So if anyone wants to jump in, we'd love to see you over there. You could watch the Heal Framework webinar and a lot more on things that dive into that. And I'll say, just to finish off, if you do want to work with a professional, you do not have to work with someone in person. In fact, working in person with these sorts of dogs sometimes is not super helpful. You are just as well off working virtually, which is why I provide so much virtual stuff, because this is 90% about guardian education and small changes that are made on a day-to-day basis that will shift the scales. And looking at that Heal framework, like it's not going to be about, you know, when they click and treat and how they deliver the reinforcement necessarily. It's going to be about how they structure the day, how they advocate for the dog, how they support the dog when they're stressed. So working virtually with someone who's good, who specializes in this, is honestly just as good, if not better, as working in person. And you can find me at my website or through Instagram. You can see my services and work with me if you want to. So I just want to say a little thank you. This is my guy looking all cute. And I'll answer some questions because I see a few in the chat already. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. Hopefully this was helpful. I know it's a big topic and I can definitely not answer everything, but hopefully it's given you like some thoughts about where to start and what to think about.
Thank you so much, Karishma, for your wonderful presentation. That was so awesome to be a part of. We're going to start taking some questions here, and it looks like would pica fall into the HEAL framework?
Where would pica fall? Okay, great question. So pica would be a medical diagnosis. So pica is eating of non-edible objects. I'm pretty sure if I sort of almost compulsive eating of non-edible objects often as well. And so that would probably fall within the pain and illness section as an illness. One of the illnesses that we can be diagnosed. It's vast. You know, when we talk about illness, I'm talking about things from thyroid dysfunction to gastrointestinal enteropathies to musculoskeletal issues, so arthritis. It could be then we have allergies, grooming, like these sorts of issues as well. Like it's endless. It's kind of wild, but we have found 6 bullets in dogs over the last 6 years. So I mean anything. We're talking anything, you know, with broken bones that they didn't know were broken, things like that. Like you never know. You know, all the way to things like, you know, neurological conditions, cancers, like they're so wild and vast, the things that we can find with these cases. And the reality is that a good behavior consultant has a good medical understanding of an animal, because you can't just turn up and treat behavior in these cases. I think it's unethical personally, because it's such a small piece of the puzzle. And the reality is it's very hard to get the medical side found and discovered with just medical practitioners, because often these things are hidden and the dog's behavior is actually the expression of the medical challenge. Does that make sense? The pica, yeah, if that makes sense, yeah. So hopefully that's helpful.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question. How does one become a behavior consultant? Is that a university study?
No, it's not, and it depends on where you are in the world. So there are different organizations that you can apply to gain a credential that's called a behavior consultant. It depends, it's different in the US, it's different in the UK, and then in other countries it varies. There is actually very little regulation around the dog training industry. So technically, pretty much anyone can call themselves whatever they want and get away with it. And to be perfectly honest, I don't really recommend that many institutions anymore to get these sorts of credentials from, because I don't really think any of them are good enough. And that's annoying, because there's no answer. If you want to become a behavior consultant, find someone who you respect and admire and talk to them and ask them what to do, and try and find mentors, because that was the thing that changed me and helped me the most, was finding mentors, which usually meant, you know, I paid people to teach me what they knew, and then developed relationships with them and benefited massively from their expertise. So yeah, that would be what I recommend, more so than pursuing credentials within the current climate. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Next question we have is how often does a change in diet help behavior pups?
Oh God, so often. It's annoying. It annoys me that so often the answer is medical. The answer is often in the health category, or at least a big piece of the puzzle is often in the health category. And diet and nutrition is a massive component that impacts our behavior and our health and our overall wellness. Lots of dogs that are really acutely unwell in terms of their behavior are also acutely unwell in terms of their gastrointestinal health. We see lots of dogs who have allergies, sensitivities, issues that need to eat hydrolyzed food, whose bowels are massively affected by their stress. So this all interacts. And I guess it's worth saying that these categories don't exist completely on their own. They all intersect and interact because it's a biological system. But very frequently it is diet and GI. So for example, Hira had chronic yeast overgrowth in his ears. He also struggled with intermittent loose stools, diarrhea, sensitive tummy for the first 2 years of his life. And the vet prescribed him on like a prescription kibble, which he was on for a significant amount of time, but then his ear infections started to become really chronic and recurrent. And what I learned is that there's a lot of starch in those kibbles. And so the sugar literally can cause yeast overgrowth. And so I've switched him to a different food. He eats a combination of fresh food and raw food, and that's my personal choice. I don't like, every dog has a different tummy, every person has a different lifestyle, so it depends. But it completely got rid of his, or like massively resolved, not completely got rid, 85% resolved his chronic yeast infections. You see how it all interacts and intersects, and none of it just exists on its own. And that's why you need someone often who's an expert to come in. But yeah, diet and GI is huge, a massive one. And people are often really confused when I'm like, what are they eating? And they're like, no, so the problem is that they won't let me touch them when they're, and I'm like, no, but what are they eating? What are their poops like? Can I see them? Like, that's literally what I'm like.
That's awesome. Yeah. I feel like you have to become a detective of your own dog almost to figure out some of these behavior issues for
Mhm.
sure. Um,
Yes, that's so
yes.
true.
Yeah, just like with people. Yeah, so true, Rachel. So true. Does anybody else have any additional questions for Karishma? If not, just want to plug info every dog. Just one more time, there's lots of behavior resources. We do in-person behavior consultations. We do virtual separation anxiety consultations, virtual behavior consultations. Just like Karishma, we're here to help you and your pup. There's so many resources out there for everybody. We try to offer training at the most affordable rate. We do offer financial assistance for families who may not have the resources to put into their pup, but they know they need the help. So please, please reach out to either Karishma or us if you have any questions at all. Thank you again, Karishma, for your wonderful time today. You did so well, and thank you for being so informational for all of us.
Well, thank you guys. It was lovely, really great questions and a lovely group. So thank you for being here today.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank
And
you.
definitely check out Every Dog. They're amazing. They have the most incredible resources, great practitioners, top-notch stuff, absolute experts. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Bye, Karishma.
Bye, everyone.